Former President Donald Trump says he had a very good phone call with Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky, that call taking place on Friday. Trump said he was grateful for Zelensky reaching out and that he would bring peace to the world and end the war in Ukraine. According to Zelensky's press secretary, Trump also assured the Ukrainian president to not believe the claims that a second Trump presidency would be beneficial to Russia. The phone call between the two leaders was the first since Trump left the White House and came a day after Trump formally accepted the Republican nomination for president. With just months until the U.S. election, one of the biggest questions, if Trump wins again, is what his policy towards Ukraine would be. Allies and adversaries alike are paying close attention to what's happening here in the U.S. and asking how that could affect the war in Ukraine and the handling of Russia. Estonia is perched right on the border with Russia. These questions weigh heavily on them, and this week on the sidelines of the Aspen Security Forum, I sat down with the Secretary General of the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Jonatan Vseviov. Take a listen. Thanks so much for sitting down with us. You have described the situation in Europe because of the war in Ukraine as the house being on fire, as an existential crisis. How would you characterize the efforts towards putting out that fire?
Well, eventually it's the result that matters. And for as long as the war is continuing, we haven't been as successful as we need to be. But looking back at what Europe was able to do 3-4 years ago and comparing this to what we're doing right now, then I don't think many would have assumed that we'd be able to do what we're doing today. The United States assistance is obviously of huge importance. We're providing military assistance to Ukraine at levels which many predicted would be unfeasible. It's been a gradual process, and it wouldn't be as frustrating if it weren't for the fact that during war, time is not just measured by minutes and hours, it's measured in lives. So half full, half empty, but eventually it's the outcome that matters. And as long as we haven't been able to push Russia to change course and pull itself back into Russia, we can't really be congratulating ourselves.
There's obviously been a fierce debate here in the United States about support for Ukraine. $60 billion more was just approved. What more do you think the U.S. and European countries need to do in terms of those aid levels to turn the tide?
I think the main thing is to understand that while we're hurting, and obviously the Ukrainians are hurting, the Russians are hurting too. The only thing that he has going for him right now, the argument upon which his theory of victory currently stands, is this notion that somehow time is on his side. So what we need to do is convince him and those who keep him and his policies around in Moscow that that's not the case, that we have staying power. And that's, I think, the challenge for the months to come.
Showing Putin that time is not on his side is one of the most stated goals by officials from NATO countries. Have you seen any change in the way that Putin is waging his war?
Well, I think some of the things that we're seeing prove that he's growing desperate. I mean, he's attempting to use the tool of fear to paralyze us with the hybrid attacks against Europe and NATO. I think this tells us of him really running out of options. He's throwing out, in quotation marks, peace initiatives, which I think is also him about to panic. So I think he's being frustrated by the unity that we've been able to demonstrate, and especially by the heroic defense that the Ukrainians have been able to put up. But the coming autumn and winter months are going to be crucially important.
In terms of the resources that Putin still has at his disposal, he obviously has a staggering, huge well of potential soldiers he can mobilize from the Russian population. The Russian defense industry has also been quite successful in terms of their production. I'm thinking of artillery shells. So do you not think that he has good reason to think that he can last for quite some time?
Russia pales in comparison to us. Any metric you use, I mean, they're just dwarfed by the size of the combined democratic world, and he's walking on thin ice. In theory, yes, he can mobilize, but he hasn't, and he's trying to avoid mobilizing in Moscow and St. Petersburg and the other cities, because he too is afraid to rock the boat too strongly. Millions of Russians have now left Russia. Fear is back in the Russian society. There is no optimism for a better future in the Russian society today. And as Napoleon once said, a leader is a dealer in hope. He can't deal hope anymore. this war will end not because of developments on the battleground alone. Big wars end when one side or the other reaches a conclusion that the strategy they pursue is no longer achievable.
When President Zelensky arrived at NATO, he said everybody is watching November, including Vladimir Putin, a reference, of course, to the U.S. elections. How closely are you watching? How closely are other NATO countries watching the U.S. elections?
Well, me personally, I'm a fan of U.S. politics, so I've been watching American elections since I was barely able to understand English. But all joking aside, obviously, everyone's watching American politics. The U.S. is a vital ally, a critical player on the global stage.
So how worried are NATO leaders about President Trump coming back in?
Yeah, I don't think anyone is worried. People have a clear-eyed approach to this. We've seen turbulent political cycles in not just the United States, in many allied governments before. I think we'll be able to weather the storm no matter what the outcome of any election is, and then we're going to have to adapt. I think it's safe to assume that we're all better off if we work together to deal with those challenges, and especially better off if we manage to defend the most basic of international rules in our very backyard, where they're being challenged by the Russians today. Because remember, it's not just territory that is being fought over. And furthermore, it is not just Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty that is at stake, but the validity of these concepts as such. If we open this Pandora's box in Europe, in our own backyard, then we'll face this turbulence of the 21st century from the worst possible position.
Thank you very much for sitting down with us. Appreciate it.